Hello everybody and welcome to another Arkham Horror video. It's finally time. People have been asking me to make this video after months and months and months ago. I made my initial thoughts on the Scarlet Keys, and I haven't done my final thoughts, my final initial thoughts on the Scarlet Keys. A big part for that is that this campaign, if you don't know, is pretty intense. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of moving pieces. It's an open world game, so my blind play of it could be completely different than your blind play of it. But I've now finished my second run of the Scarlet Keys campaign with Travis, and I'm ready to talk about it, at least share my initial thoughts. We're going to have a spoiler-free part of it, and then eventually I'm going to get into the heavy spoiler section where we're going to talk about specifics. But I'm going to start just vague, non-spoilery things. I have played every scenario except for one in the campaign, so I'm feeling pretty confident that I have at least all my initial thoughts all lined up. Overall, my opinion on the Scarlet Keys has not changed that much since my first video on this. I like the campaign. There's a lot that I really like in this campaign. While it didn't blow my socks off in the way that, like, previous campaigns did, there's a lot to like in this box for me personally that I really enjoyed. I think it's a good campaign. It's close to potentially, even in some cases, being a great campaign. I don't know if it's like in my top 5 of the 9 or so campaigns there are, 8 or 9 of them. But there's a lot that I like. The scenarios themselves are pretty simple. The maps are nice and tight. I don't like big maps. I'm not, like, very fond of them. So with Edge of the Earth, I wasn't super hyped about the giant maps. They're cool, but I'm glad they weren't the norm. There are some moments where the maps can get particularly big in the Scarlet Keys, but there's also maps that are like 6 locations, and it's just like you have to just move around those locations and get clues, and it's just nice, traditional, classic Arkham. Elephant in the room, as everyone always says, there is a lot of talking and reading in this campaign. And I think while I understand players who aren't bothered by that, I also completely understand the players who are bothered by it. There is a lot of reading. I'm going to just say that up front. No ifs, ands, or buts. There is a lot of reading in this campaign. So if that was your problem in Edge of the Earth, you did not enjoy the amount of reading you had to do, unfortunately, it doesn't get better in Scarlet Keys. However, if you did like the amount of reading that Edge of the Earth brought you, fortunately, it continues into the Scarlet Keys. For me, I'm not really interested that much in it, so it's unfortunately a knock against the campaign for me. There's just a bit too much, and I much prefer just, like, playing the scenarios, like, just diving in and playing them and looking at how the act and agenda tells the story, because that's what I'm looking for. Like, while the story is, like, obviously a great part of this game, like the campaign story, the scenario stories are more appealing to me. And I think overall, though, the scenario stories are really cool. They are really cool. Mechanically, this campaign, open world, makes it so that, as I said, it's very complicated in terms of comparing my blind play to your blind play, to that guy's blind play, to that gal's blind play, right? Like, there's a big potential, so it kind of makes it harder for, I think, general experience understanding between it. So while I enjoyed my 2 campaigns that I played of the Scarlet Keys, the amount of the difference between the scenarios we fought, the amount of scenarios between them, as well as the difficulty of the scenarios, changed completely from one to the other. So it's different. It's very different. But I do think that overall, I feel in my heart of hearts that the open world experiment, the design experiment, and the design choices and the space explored with the open world was a success. The map, which I'm going to show here, is a really cool game feature that I think the designers explored in the Scarlet Keys very nicely. The map, the moving around the map is fun. The reading connected to the map is a little bit still of an issue, I think, mostly because of the game length put on the box. It is on the higher side. 45 minutes per player is on the higher side, but when you play a bunch of campaigns before this and you get through it in like 90 minutes, like 30 minutes per player, it becomes a bit tighter. So I think that it's just something to be aware of, that it's going to skew longer because you have to read, and sometimes you might go between 2 or 3 locations, most likely just 2 at the most. Like, you'll have to be very unlucky to get a bunch of locations without a scenario. So while I think that people have definitely been in a case where they've been like going around the map and they've just been reading things, and then suddenly they're like, we've been reading for an hour and a half and we haven't found a scenario, could happen, but I think it's rare enough that it's not something that I think is like notable, in my opinion anyway. And I do think that the designers did a good enough job at least trying to tell the players where to go in the after the first scenario. So I think that overall it was a success. With that said, I am happy if they never do it again. And that's not because I hated it, it's just because I think that it's a structure that is cool like once, maybe twice. Like, if they had like a bigger structure that led into it was like a choose your own adventure type thing and you got through like in blocks, I think that would be cool to see. But like a general completely open world, cool design, cool decision. Ultimately, I think it was more of a success than a failure. I think it actually was very fun, and I look forward to it. And I think I still will like the idea of where am I going to move on the map, and I'm going to try different routes each time I play. So I think that's why, like, overall, I can't argue for me personally that it was a failure. I think it was a great success for the open world. The other big mechanic for this was the concealed mechanic. With the decoys, I'm still going to try to keep this as spoiler-free as possible, so we're just going to grab like these coterie agents, the basic ones, the acolytes of this. So the concealed mechanic is interesting, and I've seen it's very contentious online too about it. A lot of people like it, a lot of people hate it. There's very few people that are neutral on it, but that's probably because they just are too busy, I don't know, like playing Magic or like, you know, watching a movie or like going for a walk or something, right? The people in the middle rarely talk about it, and I will say that I am proudly a person in the middle when it comes to the concealed mechanic. I think it's cool, I think it's flavorful, I think it's fun. I think it is a little bit limiting in terms of how the scenarios play out. But I don't think that is particularly a bad thing. And I think they also did a pretty alright job at exploring the concealed mechanic across the campaign. It's a flavor in not every scenario, but it does show up in a good chunk of them in various forms. I also think the first scenario, which I'm going to talk about some spoilers here, I think the first scenario does a really good job at exploring. I guess this is not really a spoiler. I'm going to like just talk about the first scenario. The intro scenario, I think, does a really good job in the same way that The Gathering did of kind of like teaching the players in pieces the idea of Arkham Horror, the card game. I do think that Riddles and Rain, the first scenario of this campaign, does a great job at teaching the players the concept of concealment, of the concealed mechanic, in pieces, bite-sized chunks that like they can discover it as the game goes, which I think is really cool. However, with that said, I am still not 100% confident on how concealed works, and that might be a me issue, but that also might be just a mechanic issue, right? Like I'm not going to fully blame the mechanic, but I think that it is a little bit obtuse when it comes to certain aspects of it. And I think that if it was a little bit simpler, it probably would be more elegant, and I imagine that it would work better overall. But so that's why I said, like, I like the flavor. I like the idea of it. When you play in the scenario itself, the mechanics of revealing, if you're not like a mystic, it's pretty good. I can definitely see a problem with like mystics needing to bring a sixth sense so they don't have to spend charges on their assets to investigate and or like fight, which I think is kind of potentially an issue. But I'm curious to see if that's just like me being overly pessimistic or if it's actually going to be like that in practice. So I'm curious to see how that goes. The last thing about Concealed is that one thing I don't like is that this is going to sound crazy for someone who always talks about how I wish the difficulty was higher. The shrouds are pretty high in this game, in this campaign. And I imagine a big part of that is because of the concealed cards. And while that is probably a good thing in the grand scheme, it does feel like that this is a campaign that works best if you're just gonna like be a seeker. Right? Like, it's one of those things where like high shrouds hurt survivors the most, mystics then mystics, rogues as well, and like with a seeker you're just like, I don't care, I got 8 book anyway, I'm just gonna pass. But I'm curious, this once again also might just be something I need to get used to. This is my initial play, like my initial, even though I've played it twice, I'm still, there's a lot to chew on when it comes to this campaign. So I'm kind of just riding it out, right? Like, these are just like what I'm thinking right now, and this can totally change after I explore it further because there's a lot to eat into. So yeah, overall, going through the campaigns, I have them all, the ones I've played in front of me, and I'm gonna count the ones I like that I'm gonna give like a thumbs up to, and I think it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 out of the 8 I played, I'm gonna give a general thumbs up to. Those thumbs up can kind of like go like this, right? Like they can kind of be more like one can be here, one could be here. But 6 out of the 8 of them, I actually enjoy the scenario. Well, sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 7! 7 out of 9 of them, I've enjoyed the scenario. So overall, that's what I'm saying. Like, I think this is a really good campaign, but none of them like blew me away, right? Like, none of the scenarios I played, apart from maybe one of them, I was like, this is so cool, and is like changing, like I can't wait to get back to it, right? Like in Edge of the Earth, I really liked City of the Elder Things. Excuse me. I really liked Ice and Death Part 2. I really liked The Forbidden Peaks. Those are scenarios that I'm like, yeah, I can't wait to play that again. And there's really only like one scenario in this campaign where I'm getting those kind of vibes, but there's no scenarios apart from maybe one where I'm like, I don't want to play that again. My last spoiler-free thoughts that I'm going to share here right now is that I don't like the final scenario. I think the final scenario is probably my second least favorite final scenario. Potentially even my least favorite final scenario. Which is not what you really want from a final scenario, right? You kind of want it to go out with a big bang. But for me personally, it's not really that thing. As spoiler-free as possible, I would like it more if it was 2 scenarios. Like, it would have been, I think, better structure if it took place in 2 halves. And, like, it was like a fixed first scenario, the open world, and then a fixed last 2 scenarios. I think would have been probably better, at least in my 2 initial plays. It leaves a sour taste in my mouth, and it doesn't make me, like, excited to do more, right? It doesn't make me excited to want to come back and play more Scarlet Keys, which ultimately is probably not a great thing, right? However, again, this is just like me finding my issues with it, because there's a lot of good. There's a lot of stuff I liked here. Thematically, the story, while I said it doesn't work for me personally, and there's actually like a lot of issues I have with specifically the coterie and the members that come up, story is one of the most subjective things out there. So I understand that there's people out there who love it, and hey, I'm happy for you. Like that's what's most important, right? I'm happy that you love it, and while it doesn't work for me, I'm glad it works for you. All right. Should we get into talking about some spoiler stuff? So, so spoilers are going to begin here. So if you do not want to get spoiled, we're going to be looking at the scenarios individually, and I'm going to be sharing further details on them. So, Riddles and Rain. This was our opening scenario here. I'm not going to talk about this one too much. It's just, I think, a really good opening scenario. And I like the whole bit at the end with the Red Glove Man, where he comes in and he is like it's all about him, right? Like, he's the guy waiting for you at the end of the tunnel. Just going to get this camera in a little bit more. There we go. As we come in at the end and the Red Glove Man's here and we have to deal with him. It also does a great job at introducing the key mechanic, right? Like how the keys are there and you want to find the keys. Sorry, just getting that camera a bit more focused. There we go. And how you want to find the keys, and the keys are important. I think it does a great job of setting the scene. I think this one also does a pretty good job at telling the story through the act and agenda. And I also, while the stress of that scenario is a little bit scary, where you need to like race against the doom, those are always stressful situations for me as a player, but I do think that ultimately it is a nice race that you have to kind of go through and figure it out. I also understand the shortcut with the Tower of London and like the Trader's Gate or whatever it is. It's cool. It's cool, but it's a little bit strange, and it feels weird to me that there's like that shortcut, but the shortcut's a little bit different. I don't know. I can't really explain it. Okay. Next, I'm going to talk about the scenario that I enjoyed the most in the campaign. And one thing that I think is ultimately a huge win for this campaign is the fact that I can see different players having least and most favorite scenarios that are like very different from one another. Mine, might be a surprise, was the Alaska one. This one was a really cool scenario with some really cool locations. I loved being in Alaska, and I loved how like exploring Alaska in like the 1920s and having the Alaskan wilderness be the home for the scenario, I thought was really freaking cool. And then there's also like they tell great stories. They tell great stories on the cards as well. I think it just does a really good job of setting the scene and kind of like building this cold environment. And then, I love the whole idea of then that there's this monster going around who is, of course, this guy right here, the Void Chimera. Having to kind of like find the traces of him and the pieces of him to make sure you actually found him. And I think as well that Thorn was a really cool ally. They were a cool character, and I enjoyed experience with them. But once again, that also is kind of like my own. That might be like my own spin on them. Mostly because like when I go back to what I was saying, how the writing didn't work for me in terms of like the coterie members. Leading up to the Scarlet Keys, I did a big lore video based on a spreadsheet that I forget the user's name, and my apologies. So the person's username. They made a spreadsheet talking about like basically cataloging everything about the Scarlet Keys characters, and I built in my head a story with these characters that was not at all comparable to what they actually ended up being in the campaign, which ultimately led me down. What also made this one so cool was there's bears. I love when there's an enemy that is just a big-ass, scary animal. I love the flavor of it. I absolutely love the flavor of it. Great scenario, and I think this is the one that at least on my first 2 plays, is the scenario that I enjoyed the most. Next one I'm going to talk about here, I guess I'm going to kind of go like from top to bottom, going from what I liked and what I didn't like. We have Dead Heat. So this is the one in Marrakesh, I believe. Yep, Marrakesh with Amaranth. Our first playthrough of this one was a nightmare. So from what I've heard, going back to what I said earlier in the video, where there is such a different scaling in terms of difficulty depending on how you approach the campaign and the direction that you go from A to B to C to D, yada, yada, yada. In our first time through, we did this one really late, and we got clobbered. My second time through, Travis and I did walk away with a win, and it's a very stressful scenario, and this is one of the ones where the coterie member is like actually as terrifying as they were hyped up to be in the initial documents, which I think was cool. Amaranth is very scary, and I like how you can get the true ending with her if you do a bunch of secret stuff, and it also has my favorite, which is just a big animal, a zombie lion. Great scenario, and really stressful as well. I enjoy it. I really like the stress that it provides. So now we're kind of like out of the ones that I really enjoyed, and we're into the kind of like, so we're out of like this, and we're kind of like more in like this range, right? So we're kind of over here. So Dogs of War. This was the one that I was probably the most excited about the characters. The Beast in the Crimson Cowl, or the Beast in the Cowl of Crimson, rather, was was the coterie member that hyped me up the most. That I was just like, this is the guy that they're gonna like write songs about. Like, this is the one that's really freaking cool, right? And it unfortunately didn't work for me in terms of like in the thing, like in the story, but it is still an all-right campaign. Scenario where, you know, you have to like bully the beast, or like, you know, like the Claire and Knight can be on your side. I've only played this one once, mind you, so my perspective of it is rather limited, and I'm curious to see how a future play goes. I didn't hate the scenario, but I definitely didn't like love the scenario. Apparently it also has a giant monster. Yeah, I don't remember that. I also realize now I didn't talk about the keys in my spoiler-free part of it. And a big thing about that is just that the keys themselves don't really interact with them that much. At least in my 2 campaigns that I did. Like, we got a key and then the key was stolen from us, like, without us even playing a scenario with the key. So I'm kind of like, in my head, I don't get attached to them. You know, it's just like, they're just there, right? Sanguine Shadows. This one, actually, I played recently with Travis, and I had a good time with it. I love the reverse Night Gaunts that are in this one. The Night Gaunts, but fighting. I think that's really clever design and a little bit of a nightmare. They're scary when they show up. The problem with Sanguine Shadows, though, is it kind of is just the same thing over and over and over again. And while I definitely don't think it's a bad scenario by any means, I do think that it rewards a specific playstyle, and that playstyle is not for everybody. Luckily, that playstyle is, like, for me, but it's not... I don't know. I'm curious to see how I do this one on repeated plays, because it's kind of just a little bit... It feels a little bit clunky. I think the girl in the carmine coat, I think, is another, I would say, successful. Same with the Sanguine Watcher. I think these two are successful members of the coterie. I think overall they're a good success in terms of like the story led up to them and then them in actual. I mean, like, look at this guy. He hits for one, like, so much. I think that the problem with this scenario ultimately is just that the balance feels a little bit skewed, at least in my initial play. The fact that she punches you if you find a decoy seems a little bit strange because she was never there in the first place. I don't know. It's a little bit weird. Dancing Mad. I've had two very different experiences with Dancing Mad. This is the one with Desi. And I think the problem is that Desi kind of just is lame. He just sucks. He just sucks. And I think it really brings down the scenario. I think the hook of the scenario at the end where you have to like figure out which one's the real one is super cool. I think like that like final hook is really awesome. But I think the payoff for it isn't great. Which is weird. It's like it has a lot of good structure, but there's not a big enough hook, I think, to the general thing of the scenario. And like, while the climax is really cool, everything leading up to it is kind of just there. But it is in my, like I said, it is in my thumbs up one. Excuse me, I've had a throat ache and it's just really scratchy right now. But I think that it's by no means bad, and I don't hate playing it. And the climax, I think, will always be fun. It's just a matter of the general scenario itself just feels a little bit flat. Aliens in the Dark, also have only played this one once. I do think that in my future playthroughs of it, I won't take away the first map. I'll just pretend it's not there. It's like phasing in Magic. You put a cup over it, and you just pretend it's not there. I don't have much to say about this one either. It's not bad by any means, but I've only played it once, so I'm curious to see how it goes again. I really like the idea and the flavor of like running through the bazaar in Istanbul, which I think is really cool. And I also like the idea of chasing after a cultist when they're running away with the MacGuffin. I think that's a really cool idea, and I'm curious to see how future playthrough ones with this go. But overall, I didn't hate it. I didn't love it, but I thought it was good. I thought it was a good scenario overall. Apparently, it also has a fucking bat. Color me surprised. This guy right here. Okay. All right, the two scenarios I did not like. Shades of Suffering. I think the best way to describe this one is, hey, you know that one of your least favorite scenario, Wages of Sin, I think it's called? How about we do that again, but we take away all your actions in the process? And it's a shame, too, because I think this is a cool setting. It's because this is the one in Shanghai, right? No, this isn't Kuala Lumpur. Is that? I don't even. Do I know nothing about geography? No, it's in Kuala Lumpur. Shanghai, 32. I don't know what that one is. What was in Shanghai? Oh no, that's where Flint goes, and then it leads to that one. Okay, or something like that. 50S in Hong Kong. What the heck? There's so much. Interesting. I'm not too sure. I don't know the in-depth campaign log stuff. I'm just a guy. But it has a lot of cool stuff. I love the environment in terms of like the location, but the whole like the spirit thing is really cool. Having like the interlude we have to read is a little bit clunky. But I think the problem is she just sucks up all your actions. Each investigator loses one action. Like, that's a nightmare. It just sucks. Like, it takes one of my least favorite scenario mechanics, and it then adds action drain from it, which is probably one of the least fun things the game can do to you, right? Taking away your actions completely. Because to me, there's a big difference between like an Ancient Evil's taking your turn away and saying, hey, you lose 2 actions this turn. Because I'm only going to do 1 thing now, where with an Ancient Evils, I still got to do 3 things. I just got to work a bit harder to make up for the tempo that the game took from me. And like, even though like in theory the 2 are the same, they feel different to a gamer, which is which is something to be aware of. Congress of Keys. Okay, so I said earlier that I thought that this scenario should be split into 2. And what the frick? I have a scratch on the back of this card. I think that this scenario would have been better if it was split between the first half, which was fighting the Coterie members, and the second half, which was following the Red Glove Man into static electricity land. I hate that you start with Coterie members engaged with you on the first turn. I do not like that, Sam. I do not like green eggs and ham. I really don't. Like, this might be something that becomes better on future playthroughs, but I absolutely just... It's a pet peeve of mine. If it happened to me in, like, a custom campaign, I would complain about it. And if it happens to me in an official campaign, I'm still going to complain about it. I think it's a very weird choice. And I think it, like, is just a bad choice overall, I think. But once again, I'm curious to see how future playthroughs with that go. I really like Travis, I really like the section where you are, like, the council is meeting and they're voting on you. I think that's really cool. It's a good climax to all your decisions that I haven't really felt since, like, realistically, like, probably Dunwich and Carcosa, right? Like, most other campaigns have kind of been on rails. And this one it feels very open in terms of its climax as well and the story beats that are delivered at the end, which I think it really accomplished in that one. But I would have liked it if there was the vote, the fight, and then we stepped through and we fought. We chased after the Red Glove Man into static electricity land. I understand that people are sick of like the whole fighting an ancient one in a weird other world, and yeah, I get it. I kind of am sick of it too. I also do think that the Red Glove Man was unfortunately done very dirty. Don't get me started on this. I do not like it. I don't know why this camera... It says it's in focus when I zoom it in. Yeah, I think this might just be too close for the camera. I'll zoom out a bit. Yeah, because like that, I can read that text. It says it's in focus. What the heck? It's, you know, things are crazy. So my apologies if that was a little bit blurry, but yeah, like... I loved the Red Glove Man as a character. I know Eric also loved the Red Glove Man as a character. And when Eric asked me what was the big reveal with the Red Glove Man, I didn't even have the heart to tell them, right? Like, I didn't want to bring it up. I was just like, Eric, I got bad news. It's not good. And it's kind of a bummer. And it kind of ruins the Red Glove Man a little bit for me. And I think a big reason for that is because the Red Glove Man lives in the world of the unknown. And then as soon as he becomes whatever the heck this is... It's not great. It's just like I don't know. Like I would have been fine if it was just a mask of Nyarlathotep. But for me, it was a loss in the flavor. And then mechanically, there is the City of Remnants. These things, hate it. Don't like it. Didn't like it. Don't like it. Don't like it. Don't like it. It just feels strange and clunky to me, and it's like the opposite of what I want when I'm playing. Like I like elegance. You know, I like that kind of stuff. I like things to just be nice and simple, and it probably would have just been better with a map. The code cracking bit was really cool. I think that part's fun, like cracking the code. I think, though, I'm going to say it, I think it actually would have fit better earlier in the campaign, because it has that kind of spy feel where, you know, you're cracking a code. It feels a little bit strange when you're doing it in an otherworld dimension. It's like pulling switches for, like, lights to go on, and you're like, finally, we can go approach the Red Glove Man at the top of the tower that we had to break through this weird puzzle system that he had set up, and it just felt a little bit strange. However, The top part is also kind of cool, and like I said, while it felt strange, it mechanically is pretty fun. Okay, I'm probably forgetting some stuff. There's a lot to talk about. Now I'm so mad that this was essentially out of focus earlier. How embarrassing. Anyways, this is mostly also here for you to listen to me talk. It's the images don't matter. You just gotta, like, you know. I'm gonna pretend that my opinion matters. So yeah, I think overall though I like Scarlet Keys. I think it's a very fun campaign. The scenarios are cool. The map is fun to explore. I think that the faults for me lie in the mechanical choices in some of the scenarios, and the story didn't really hook me that much. But I'm excited to play it again with Bryn and Travis in the near future when we do our group rerun of it with the three of us. And I'm hoping it goes better than our blind run, because we got absolutely clobbered in our blind run, like just absolutely clobbered. And it should be fun to revisit some of these scenarios and see how it changes. And that's why really it's hard to kind of like fully explain my opinions on the Scarlet Keys, because my next campaign play of it could be completely different. And I think that's ultimately a success. And while I think that the Scarlet Keys might have a really good future, right? It might be like kind of like grow for me to the level that the Forgotten Age grew for me, right? Or the way that Innsmouth is growing on me, right? I can see the Scarlet Keys becoming cooler over time, because it's like, it really feels like the flavor for it kind of changes, and like the style of scenario kind of changes depending on how your current campaign is going. And I think that ultimately that's a success. Yeah, that's it. I've done it. I've done it. My final initial thoughts on the Scarlet Keys campaign. Other than that, we're going to be back for another video soon. A huge thank you to everyone who watched this video. What do you think of the Scarlet Keys campaign? Make sure to let me know down in the comments. And a huge thank you to all of our patrons for supporting the channel. Have a good one. I love you. And as always, GG's!